David Robbins is president and co-founder of Hill & Robbins. His practice emphasizes the fields of water and natural resources law, water quality, and environmental law. Mr. Robbins has represented the state of Colorado for quite a bit of time in a variety of interstate water matters. And in particular, from '85 to 2011, he served as counsel of record for the state of Colorado in the U.S. Supreme Court in the case of Kansas versus Colorado on the Arkansas River. Now, I know of that, and I knew of his name because I was a professor of water resource engineering at Kansas State University from 1989 to 1992, and we followed that case closely. I never got involved in that particular case, but it was interesting. There's sort of a lot of interesting history in that period of time with the Arkansas River case, and especially related to the water resource expert that Kansas State was using at the time. So with that, Mr. Robbins will give us a keynote address and his perspectives on the Colorado River and, I believe, where things are going to go there. With that.
Good morning. It's always nice to come to Fort Collins and get to see so many friends. We always seem to get together once or twice a year here, and so it's a pleasure. For those of you that I don't know, I look forward to meeting you at some point in time. I'd like to be sure, I'm currently the chairman of the Exterior Advisor Committee to the Water Institute, and I want you all to know how pleased we are to have John as the new director. And I hope you all support him and help him in his efforts to advance and improve the Water Institute. I'd also like to again acknowledge Jennifer Gimbel. I've known Jennifer for probably 40-some years and have observed her illustrious career in state water resources issues, federal water resources issues, and international water resources issues, as well as her time in academia. The Colorado Water Congress, as many of you know, is really just a herd of buffalo. And so it is very wonderful, I think, that group would honor Jennifer. It makes one honor a year, an award named after Wayne Aspinall, who was a longtime congressman from the 3rd District, who advanced the interests of Colorado in the Congress of the United States. And the award has been given for probably about 40 years. So congratulations, Jennifer. I'm sort of a contrarian on this bit. And first of all, I also want to acknowledge I'm just a pale fill-in, sort of a mirage for who Jennifer had lined up to give this opening set of comments. Becky Mitchell, the Colorado Commissioner on the Colorado River, was the person that you were supposed to hear from, and you would have heard some significant and very sophisticated comments about the status of the Colorado River Compact. I was brought in as a song and dance act to fill in for Becky, who has to spend time doing some other things related to the river. I almost always start talking about compacts by reminding everyone that the reality of compacts is that they are fundamental constitutional documents. When the 13 colonies found out that they could not maintain 100% of their sovereignty and yet hang together as a body politic under the Articles of Confederation, they stepped back, came back together, and negotiated a constitution. And the purpose of that constitution, when you peel off all of the layers of the onion, was to provide a roadmap or a method by which each of the 13 sovereign colonies, sovereign states, gave up a portion of their sovereignty to form a federal government. The critical issue here is they retained all of the sovereignty that they did not pass to the federal government through the Constitution. So each of our 50 states has this basket of stuff that it is entitled to control and make the decisions on. The Constitution contains something called the equal footing language or doctrine, which said that any additional state that entered the Union would do so on an equal footing with the original 13. So we're all 50 of us are in this together. The federal government has what we gave them, but it does not have that which we retained. And there are a lot of things that were retained. And so the Constitution, at Article 1, Section 10, Clause 3, the framers of the Constitution said, the states may not enter into treaties or compacts with one another without the consent of Congress. They refer to it as a clause of negative implication. So when we talk about compacts, we have to remember that these are documents in which true sovereigns are negotiating and compromising their fundamental interests. And the Supreme Court has said, yeah, they're compacts. There are also laws of each of the signing states. There are also laws of the Congress of the United States, adopted by the Congress of the United States. But fundamentally, for the purposes that you're going to talk about today, they are contracts, right? That means that they can't be changed without the consent of all of the contracting parties. It doesn't matter how big California is, they can't change the Colorado River Compact unless the other 6 states agree. All right? So that, you have to remember that, because there's always a lot of talk about, well, it's a drought, and we should renegotiate the Colorado River Compact. How are you going to do that if one state says, no, I kind of like what we got. We know what it is. We've made our plans around it. We'll live with a lesser amount of water. No negotiation. Congress can't unilaterally change a compact just because the politics shifted, because it is a law of each of the states as well as a law of the United States. That's really an important concept to keep in mind as we talk about how to solve these problems. The next concept we have to keep in mind is there's only the amount of water that Mother Nature gives us, whether we're in a time of surplus or a time of drought. And one state cannot, in a time of drought, continue to use water as if it's a time of surplus without taking it from somebody else. You can't renegotiate a compact without there being losers, right? If you only have 100 gallons in the bucket and you have 4 people who all get 25 gallons, and the bucket then has 50 gallons in it, You can't say, well, I'm going to keep my 25 and it's really dry, so I should get 5 more, because that means the other people who are theoretically sharing the water from the bucket get none. And that doesn't work. So as you talk, don't fall into this is an extraordinary drought, therefore we have to do extraordinary things. We do. But don't fall into the idea that the thing we do is take somebody else's water. I'm going to digress for a minute. And please, please, don't say there's lots of water in the Missouri River or the Mississippi River or one of the rivers in Canada. Ladies and gentlemen, every state of the Union is in here on an equal footing. They all think those rivers belong to them to the extent they make beneficial use of them. The people in Louisiana don't view the water that is saving their environment along the Gulf of Mexico, that is allowing them to have a fishery and an oyster fishery, that's surplus. They don't see it that way. The environmental community doesn't think that inflush of fresh water to create the brackish environment along the Gulf Coast is a waste of water. And so think about everybody else in the country when you talk with neighbors and friends about, well, we don't have to solve this problem because we'll just build a big pipeline and take the water that nobody else needs. The guy who has several $100 million wrapped up in barges and push boats probably doesn't think it's extra water that he is hauling the nation's coal and grain on down to the ports on the Gulf Coast. So to me, it's just a waste of time. It's an effort to say, I can do whatever I want, and everybody else should sacrifice to permit me, because I'm so wonderful, to continue to do what I want in the face of a natural problem, which is a huge drought. Okay? So I have to say that now it's off my chest. I won't talk about it until lightning strikes in a few minutes, and then I'll be off on a tear again. I want to make one other point, too, about compacts. People have a tendency to want to argue that compacts are somehow greater than anything else under the Constitution. They're not. The sovereign states gave authority to the federal government to regulate stuff. And to the extent the federal government wants to regulate, feels the need to regulate, makes the findings sufficient to allow it to regulate, it can. It can pass the Clean Water Act. It can pass the Endangered Species Act. And occasionally, things that Congress does interfere with what one or more water users might otherwise have wanted to do with water resources in the West. The fact that a water user can't do what it wants with a certain amount of water doesn't obviate the compact. It doesn't change the compact. The underlying allocation remains because the federal government doesn't have the legal authority constitutionally to simply change the compact by passing some other law that it's entitled to pass. There's the difference between formally, legally changing the allocations in the compact and simply regulating an area of commerce that the Congress is authorized by the Constitution to regulate. Allocation schemes are inherent in every compact. Some compacts are better structured to manage through variability in the hydrologic cycle, times of surplus, times of drought. Some are better than others at doing that. My favorite compact is the Rio Grande Compact. Now, the reason I like it so much as a constitutional water compact guy is that it actually has within it tables of relationship. And it has a gauge where water comes out of the mountains and a gauge at the state line. And the tables of relationship are curves, curvilinear functions, that the more water that comes out of the mountains, the more that has to go to New Mexico. The less that comes out of the mountains, the less that goes to New Mexico. And it's really easy for the lawyers and the engineers, and most importantly, the farmers, to understand exactly how the river is going to work in any given year. And the functions are applied annually. Okay? So that, to me, was well thought out. It was preceded by something called the Rio Grande Joint Investigation, which was conducted by a predecessor of the Bureau of Reclamation / USGS, where they studied every single field from Creed all the way past El Paso to Fort Quitman, Texas. And they made maps, and they showed every single field, every ditch, every drain, and they measured the water coming out of every creek. And then they said, wow, this is really variable. So we can't just do something like they did on the Colorado and say Colorado owes X amount of water every year to New Mexico. That's my favorite. The other great one that is also drives you crazy is the Arkansas. It didn't promise Kansas anything, but what it did in Article 4D was it said, but Colorado cannot expand the use of the water of the Arkansas beyond what was occurring in 1948. They couldn't even improve or prolong the functioning of the irrigation works. And as John alluded to, we had a 20-year catfight because, obviously, Colorado installed wells, and Colorado has now installed center pivot sprinklers without fully accounting hydrologically for their consequence. The Colorado River, as you will hear, seeks to guarantee the lower 3 states an annual supply of approximately 7.5 million acre-feet a year without regard to hydrology. As many of you know who have read the history, that was based upon the assumption, number one, that the variability in the hydrology would encompass that, and that there would be sufficient water, but more importantly, number two, that there would be large main stem reservoirs built that would be rationally managed. That's the key, right? If you build big reservoirs specifically to ensure that you can meet a fairly stringent delivery obligation under a compact for the 4 upper division states, you have to assume that the reservoirs, almost 40 to 50 million acre-feet of them, will be operated rationally to reserve water to protect the delivery obligation held by the upper division. That has not happened, as you will hear and probably discuss. The lower division has never accounted for system loss. System loss can be 1 million or 1.5 million acre-feet a year. That's evaporation and seepage off of the big reservoirs and canals and the way in which the water is managed. Imagine what Lake Powell would look like today if for the past 30 or 40 years we had left on a 1.5 million acre feet in the reservoir each year. It'd be looking like it was almost full. So it's important to not accept all of the conditions in which we find ourselves and say, therefore, it's our job to bare our shoulders and whip ourselves with nettles, because at the bottom line, at least in Colorado, we have managed the resource extremely well, efficiently, and have not overused a drop out of the system ever. And we need to resist the blandishments of the lower basin trying to convince us that we are somehow part of a problem that they alone, in my humble opinion, have created. When you talk about water supply in the compacts, I want you all to focus on the fact that there is a provision in the Colorado River Compact which eliminates from consideration what are called prior perfected rights. These are water rights that were decreed and in use in 1922 when the compact was first adopted by the 6 of the 7 states. Prior perfected rights are free to operate in their priority within their state and within their division, upper and lower. And so when we talk about how much water is in the system, we always have to keep in the back of our minds there are a group of water rights in each state that are going to be free to divert and consumptively use water from the system. I think it's about 1.6, 1.65, 1.68 million acre feet in the upper division. Becky would tell you the exact number, so that's why you got number 2 show horse up here. I want you to think about one other thing, because I hear people sometimes complaining about it, but another thing that the state of Colorado did, as did its 3 neighboring states, is that in the 1948 Upper Colorado River Compact, they understood that the absolute apportionment that was contained in the Colorado River Compact didn't really work for them. And so instead of putting numbers of acre feet in the compact, they put percentages in so that each state obtains not a set amount of water, but a percentage of the available supply. Colorado gets something a little bit less than 52% of whatever's available in the entire system. We have had one upper division state who for quite a while followed what I thought was sort of a misguided view, which was they multiplied their percentage times 7.5 million and said, well, that's how much we get to consume. It doesn't matter how much water's in the river. And of course that, if each state adopted a view like that, would be a disaster. But what we did do in the Upper Colorado River Compact, in addition to agreeing to what percentages people get, we also agreed to set up an Upper Colorado River Commission that would actually make enforceable decisions about how compact administration and management would occur. We can do that. Our legislature can approve a compact that cedes a portion of what otherwise would be a sovereign's right to manage its water resources. We can agree by compact to actually transfer a portion of that authority to a interstate commission, and that's what we did. So we don't have the ability, as you talk about what are we going to do about the Colorado River and the current drought, is we don't have the ability to just do that on our own. We have to do it in conjunction with our partners, the other 3 upper division states, so that we have a common approach to managing whatever compact demand we have acknowledged. I'm going to cite one case. I think everyone in the audience knows it, but I want to be sure that you all have one Supreme Court case named to write down so that you can all say, my God, he is a lawyer. He knows a case. Hinderleiter versus La Plata and East Cherry Creek Ditch. We signed the La Plata River Compact in 1924, something like that, and it contained certain obligations on Colorado to meet flow targets below Hesperus on the La Plata and deliver water to New Mexico. I think the number's 100 cubic feet per second. And the La Plata and East Cherry Creek Ditch said, well, that's a 1924 compact, the hell with you. I got an 1892 water right. I'm senior, and under the Constitution, I can take my full decree, and if you don't make, New Mexico doesn't get its water tough. And the Supreme Court and State Engineer Hinderleiter, the Supreme Court said, Hinderleiter's right, because what you have to understand is your Constitution doesn't mean anything when you are dealing with an interstate apportionment under the Compact Clause of the Constitution, because your government, the state of Colorado, in negotiation with an equal government, the state of New Mexico, ceded certain authorities that it might otherwise have, and one of those was it ceded the ability of water rights under Colorado water rights granted under the Constitution and laws of Colorado. The state said, we are willing to forego a demand that all of those water rights be served in exchange for finding common ground between the states. And so diverters on the La Plata and East Cherry Creek Ditch, I'm sorry, but you're going to have to shut down whenever the flow below Hesperus is insufficient to meet the demands of New Mexico. Because why? Because the water that's flowing in Colorado isn't your water in the first place. It's New Mexico's water. Colorado's already agreed that it's New Mexico's water. So you can apply your priority against whatever water is Colorado's, but the stuff you're diverting right now ain't yours. It's New Mexico's, so cut it out. That applies to all compacts, and we need to be sure we're clear as you go through your discussions later today that what you're really talking about is not all of the water. Why, there's plenty of water in my river and California's stealing it. No, they're not. The water that belongs to California is California's water. And by the way, I always love to say this, if it were our water, we would have used it, right? And what's it doing 5,000 feet downhill and 800 miles away if it's our water? It is that these compacts actually assign a state vested interest in the water that is flowing within the entire compacted system. So I will I think I'm about ready to run out of time. I am. So what I will leave you with is, as you talk today, please talk about reality. As you talk today, please understand that unless everyone agrees that that the Colorado River Compact should be renegotiated, it's not going to be renegotiated. You can't make people do or break a contract that they're unwilling to break. We have to learn to live with what we as a state have been apportioned, not only on the Colorado, but on every other one of the 9 compacts. And simply saying there's got to be a way that will let us continue to use more water than we're potentially apportioned is not a solution. So have a great program. It just looks very exciting. You're going to have absolutely expert people on each panel, and at the end of the day, Jim Lockhead's going to talk to you, a man of great gravitas as far as the Colorado River is concerned and everything else. And I hope you all engage and enjoy, and thank you, John. Now, you know when you see a guy who's been practicing law for more than 50 years and gives talks every now and then that he's learned one thing, and that is get the hell off the stage as fast as you can after you're finished, because then they can't ask you questions. Does anybody have a question? Don't be afraid. I mean, ask me. All right. Yes.
And one of the interesting things I've seen is all the rivers in Nevada operate under decrees, where all the rivers in Colorado operate under compacts. So could you give this sort of a real basic brief primer of the difference?
Sure. Yes, absolutely. I will repeat the question. What's the difference between operating on decrees and operating on compacts? And I'm going to add one other term, which is contract. In the lower Colorado River, the way people get water out of the Colorado River is generally, and there are exceptions, but generally through a contract with the Secretary of the Interior. So that's how southern Nevada gets water. They don't call their priority. They call up the water master and say, I need water. Okay? Colorado, many of Nevada's rivers don't have to worry about compacts because they come off the Sierras and the Whites and the Wallowas, and they all flow into these huge groundwater basins that involve no other state. And so they allocate their flows in most of the rivers. Even the Truckee flowing through Reno, it's not going anywhere. It's just going out into a sink east of town. And so they use decrees to apportion the water, but they don't have any obligation downstream. It's like most of California. They don't have a compact with the ocean, so they can do all sorts of stuff, right? We have no rivers that don't go somewhere except for Crestone Creek and Dead Man Creek, which all flow into the closed basin sump in the San Luis Valley. But everything else goes out of state, and we either have a U.S. Supreme Court apportionment decree or a compact. So we take our share and do just like Nevada. We allocate it out by decree in priority. But at the end of the day, we are driven by an obligation to comply with our compacts. That's the issue with conservation, right? If you say we're going to conserve so we can consume more, that means you're picking someone else's pocket, because we owe our neighbor on each of these rivers the same amount of water, and it doesn't matter how we use our share. So if for 100 years you've used 10, and of the 10, 5 was consumed and 5 went back to the system, and you say, well, I'm going to put in a whole different rig up here, and I'm going to consume all 10 on my place. Well, that 5 that was going back to the system belonged to and was used by your state to give water to Kansas and Nebraska and New Mexico, Utah, Wyoming. And we got to find that additional 5 somewhere else, which means it has to come from somebody who's been using it. So that's why we talk about we manage against compacts, even though we're doing it by administering water rights. We don't have the benefit, we, Colorado, of being able to just consume whatever is coming out of the mountains. We have to think very carefully who's going to use it and how are we going to get our compacted obligation to our neighbor. So, contract, decree, compact, they're all potentially involved.
Leavenworth, Kansas, is based on what you've said, just blowing smoke?
There is a proposal to move water from eastern Kansas or beyond and bring it up at least to the Front Range. I have been told that there is that proposal. I believe that the engineers all have to stand up and say, you know, that's pretty hard to imagine because water's not compressible very much. Every 1,000 feet requires an even bigger pump than most places ever have seen. So how are we going to jam enough water 100 and some miles uphill for water supply? Folks, we're growing with 80% of our water is in agriculture. Who's going to pay to bring water from great distances away from states that need the water and fight us? I mean, why would Kansas pump water up to Douglas County when they spent 20 years fighting with Colorado about the water that they wanted from Colorado to go down? It doesn't make any sense. If you think it wasn't a fight, the Attorney General in Kansas used to refer to me publicly as the evil Mr. Robbins. And so now Douglas County has made a proposal to try to take water out of the San Luis Valley as well. I'm well aware of that proposal. In other words, taking water from a valley that is currently struggling because of a drought to allow enough agriculture to continue so that the valley's economy at least continues. And Douglas County is saying, well, what the hell? You know, a bunch of dumb farmers will just take some of their water and pump it up to Douglas County. And this will be the 4th fight I've had in the Rio Grande against people who are trying to take water out of the valley for the benefit of the Front Range. And I love a fight, so it's going to be good, even though I'm old. All right. Yes?
We had one here.
All right, I'll do 2 and then run. I'll try to be short and not give you long answers.
This is actually a good segue to what you're talking about right now. On a federal level, do you see people lobbying, on the behalf of agriculture that they have there, and the U.S. government subsidizes it? Do you see people coming in to support the farmers and keep their water at the end of the line there in the lower basin?
Are you asking in the lower basin of the Colorado River? Yeah. That's
Change the compact on their behalf.
as you will hear later, that's the bloodbath today. That's where people really have real swords and are swinging at each other, because some of the prior perfected rights that make up the lower basins division are all in agriculture. And so the cities which have demands are the ones who are more exposed. So yes, the federal government has a lot of contracts that it defends with agriculture in the lower basin. Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Christian. Lower Basin resident. It strikes me that there's a fundamental mismatch between environmental reality and the American legal system. Like, the legal system's always kind of catching up to what's actually the reality on the ground. But you mentioned, only using water that states have been apportioned. Well, how does one then either justify or explain, Utah's, Lake Powell pipeline, because they're justifying that very pipeline on simply using their apportionment. They're not going to exceed it. They're going to use what's legally available to them. But the environmental reality is that there will have to be shortages, in the lower basin because of that adherence to the legal system. So I was just wondering if you could, speak to that.
The legal system provides the framework, right? How everybody paints within the framework. Of course there are going to be shortages in the lower basin. They've overused their share of the compact for 50 years. Why shouldn't they suffer shortage? It's their problem. It's not our problem. We today are using 3.5 million acre feet in the whole damn upper basin. We're apportioned 7.5. They used 10.2 last year. And they want to get us to say, oh my God, you're going to have to take shortage? Of course not. Now, the Utah pipeline has not been built. And they don't have what I would call a ringing endorsement from any of the other 6 states, for the very reason that you posited. How can you build a pipeline and then a community in Washington County, Utah, dependent upon the pipeline when we are in this condition of crushing shortage? And their answer is, we're going to take water from Flaming Gorge Reservoir, run it down the Green River into Lake Powell, and we're going to take that water out, and that's part of our allocation. That's part of the difference between 3.5 and 7.5. But, Becky would be so much more politic. I'm sorry, I'm not politic. And I believe firmly that if the lower basin wants to try to overuse, that's where the soreness, the muscle soreness ought to be, not on people who are not even coming close to using what they're entitled to use. And one other thing, remember, the cities only use 20% at max of all of the water that's used in the river, right? And so all of this brick in the toilet stuff is going to solve the problem is baloney. Baloney. Ring baloney, around baloney. It's all baloney. You can't solve the problem that exists today in the hydrology of the Colorado River by taking a shorter shower and not irrigating your lawn. And where do you think all of these big trees get their water? It's not from drip irrigation, ladies and gentlemen. It's from watering the lawns. You don't think a tree that size is going to live off a little drip line, do you? No. So, and I have other opinions if anybody like them.